Hi, everybody. This is Simon from Harmonize with a short summary of the Building Conflict Resilient Organizations course. So our course statement grounds the entire arc of the curriculum. And this is what we were focused on inside of the course. So in order to achieve our goals, any organizational goals, or harmony, which is the word that we use to kind of point to liberation, freedom, justice, in order to achieve those, we must be conflict resilient. This means having ways of seeing, being, and working together that allow us to remain functional in the presence of conflict and to unlock the transformative potential within conflict. That ability is built from conflict resilience practices, which tend to underlying dynamics before conflict emerges, and conflict engagement processes to rely on when there is an acute conflict. The conflict preparedness policy is an articulation of an organization's resilience practices and engagement processes that enable an organization to work together in conflict. Having those practices and processes in place enable us to skillfully choose when to cabin, when to avoid, and when to engage conflict. Successful implementation of that policy requires individuals to see the opportunities within conflict and be resilient enough to actualize them together. This grounds our whole course. So what do we mean exactly by conflict resilience? Conflict resilience is the ability built from seeing, being, and working together to unlock the possibility within conflict and to prevent conflict from becoming overly disruptive. This requires the ability to remain choiceful and functional in the presence of conflict. Choiceful means the ability to make true choices, and functional is the ability to continue with other activities and obligations while conflict is present. So what do we mean by see, be, and work together? Well, to see is the way that we make sense of the world. To be is the way we navigate our internal experiences and take individual action. And work is the way that we coordinate our actions with each other in order to achieve our shared goals. So we need to be able to do all of those different things in order to be conflict resilient, which is unlocking that hidden transformative potential inside of every conflict, and also recognizing that conflict is a normal and unavoidable part of our lives. So sometimes we need to focus on unlocking the transformative potential within it, and sometimes we need to just continue doing what we were doing while holding conflict gracefully. Here's a certain way that we see conflict resilience in the context of organization. So when we start an organization, there's some mission, some reason that we are in existence, and we're trying to achieve a successful intervention. So we want to actually do something in the world. But on the journey from that mission to the successful intervention, we're going to hit this orange circle, which is all of the different strategic, political, interpersonal dynamics that might come up in the course of us working together. And we need to navigate all of those things in order to achieve the successful intervention. Thing is, conflict, these disruptions and moments of discord or disagreement or struggle emerge as we confront all of the things inside of that orange circle there. So we have our organizational mission. We want to get to that successful intervention. So what do? Well, first, we build organizational infrastructure. And we think of organizational infrastructure in terms of 10 dimensions of what creates an organization. The analysis and cosmology, how we basically understand the world and create, make sense of what's in it and analyze what's going on. Placement, how we see our relationship geographically to the people who are around us on a material, geographic, like where we are in the world, as also where we are in terms of different fields of study or fields of practice or areas of the movement or issue areas or identity areas. Where do we place ourselves in various different maps? There's a purpose, which is why we're in existence as an organization, what we hope to achieve. The structures, which are all of those formal roles and relationships and organizational charts and job descriptions. The practices, which are the everyday ongoing activities that allow us to work together. How do we facilitate meetings? How do we communicate? How do we do project planning? Then there's processes. Those are things that have definitive start and end points inside of our organization. Hiring, for example, is a process. At one moment, we're not hiring, then we are hiring, and we hire, then we're not hiring again. So these processes with definitive start and end points. There's policies, which are written agreements that could be anything from a compensation policy to an anti-harassment policy to a accepted working hours policy. There's also the people, the real human beings that are inside, that are using this analysis and cosmology, that are inhabiting these structures, that are using these practices, the actual people that are there, the relationships between people, that quality of how we be together. And then there's the culture, which is kind of this challenging to describe sum total of all of the ways of being and seeing and the accepted norms that are present inside of the organization. People often refer to it as like the water that we're swimming in, even when we don't realize that we're fish. So these are the dimensions of an organization that we build in order to get to that successful intervention. And some of these, the combination of all of those organizational bits of organizational infrastructure and how we use that, as well as a specific set of practices, ongoing things that we use specifically to build conflict resilience, then creates a sphere of resilience for us, which is the portion of the dynamics that we're going to encounter that we can remain resilient in the face of. So there's plenty of things that it's a dynamic. We have no trouble just fluidly meeting that dynamic, unlocking the possibility within it, remaining functional in its presence. We have a disagreement and we move on and we do it. That's the things that are inside of our sphere of resilience. So we're trying to use the organizational infrastructure and the resilience practices to start increasing that sphere of resilience as much as possible. So the course, we went over a bunch of specific practices that we can use to increase the sphere of resilience. Again, practices meaning activities baked into the regular organizational rhythms that increase the sphere of resilience. We go over four big categories in the course. First, foundational. Those are things that create a shared approach to conflict. Second, personal, things that individuals do that don't require formal organizational buy-in. Interpersonal practices, things people can do in pairs or small groups without requiring formal organizational buy-in. And then organizational practices. And those are the things people do that require group participation. And because they require group participation, they require the organization to formally say, yes, this is a thing that we are all doing together. Those foundational practices that are inside of the course are setting our guide stars for the organizational, using an organizational value statement, then using a conflict belief statement to be able to orient to conflict as a team, bringing on the right people through hiring processes, normalizing and building resilience from the very beginning of someone's employment journey through onboarding, continuously exercising the muscles and tracking progress of individuals through training and professional development. Those set the shared foundation for conflict resilience in the organization. Then there are personal practices, which are things people can do inside of their own self. They can use their own agency regardless of what anyone else chooses to do. We talked about proactively owning mistakes that have happened in order to model accountability and lower the stakes of conflict engagement. We offer generative sentence starters to support people to show up skillfully in tricky conversations. Then a framework of teshuva that allows us to anchor in the intention to have a transpersonal experience, deepening our own ability to make choices through self-awareness, communicating in order to be able to collaborate with our speaking with signal framework, and then being able to identify and actualize possibility inside of conflict by mapping it across the 8 levels of human relationships that we talk about: personal, interpersonal, organizational, systemic, ideological, world, all, and source are all occurring when a conflict manifests. So the more that we as an individual can start to see that, the better we can identify and actualize possibilities. On an interpersonal level, we talked about proactively building relationships that create resilience in the context of relationships. We engage issues when they're inside of people's sphere of resilience through one-on-one conflict engagement tools. Then the course includes how to share learnings and shifts with impacted folks using conflict report backs and encouraging effective engagement with conflict celebrations. On an organizational level, the course includes using the Vibes Pulse survey in order to track ongoing dynamics inside of your organization and be able to intervene in low stakes ways, using hygiene meetings to regularly address feelings that accrue, using feedback sessions to invite direct communication about issues that may brew conflict, and using proactive engagement to develop a shared understanding and approach to issues before they even grow outside of that sphere of resilience. So all of that goes to expand the sphere of resilience. We're trying to get from organizational mission to that intervention. So we build our infrastructure, we create our resilience practices. Now we can start to navigate and maintain resilience inside of a larger portion of that orange circle, be able to navigate more things that may come up. And of course, any organization isn't going to actually implement every single one of the things in the menu of practices that the course includes, but the course includes a large menu and then offers tools and supplements so that people can choose which of those things may be applicable to the organization so that they can implement them. Now, when conflict actually does occur, when there is something that comes up that's not just like an everyday disagreement, we actually have to attend to it. One of the things that we need to figure out is, are we going to engage it, cabinet, avoid it, or escalate it? So to engage a conflict is to respond directly and purposefully in order to change the dynamics of that conflict. Two people are having a disagreement. We're not just going to try to resolve the disagreement so it doesn't feel awkward anymore. We're going to try to get underneath it, ask what's really occurring, what's the possibility that wants to be birthed. Let's figure out how to find that and make that real. That's to engage. We could also cabin a conflict, which is the purposeful decision to not engage in a particular environment. We may be in the middle of, say, a budget process. And so we don't want to engage a conflict that might disrupt the whole budget process. We're going to say we're going to get to that conflict afterward. Just make a decision that there's a time and a place for that, but it's not right here and right now. We may also avoid a conflict. And that's the choice to not respond directly to the conflict, not engage, and not cabin. We're just not going to respond directly. This choice might be true or an intentional choice based on someone's assessment of what might happen if they were to engage it. So they just decide to avoid, or it might be a conditioned choice or unintentional that just allows those dynamics to stay there, being uncomfortable and disruptive for everyone, and just not leaning in for an unconscious reason. We could also escalate a conflict, which is a choice to take actions to increasingly frame a resolution as an either or struggle. So not say there's a powerful way that we could reframe this conflict to be able to be on the same team. It's actually to say there are two different teams, and we're going to have to actually engage in some type of power struggle in order to figure out which of the either ors will win. And we talk in the course about the escalating a conflict is not often the move to make inside of the context of organizations that are trying to work together toward a shared purpose, but sometimes it is. It is an option that people can take. And then, of course, people can also let a conflict go, which is just purposefully choose to release any hard emotions, judgments, or defensiveness in order to meet the next moment with new eyes. So we have to choose which one of these things we're going to do when we see a conflict, when we meet a conflict. The course goes deeply into engagement processes. So what do we do when we want to engage? And those are interventions with specific beginning and endpoints that are intended to unlock the possibility within a specific conflict. We go over 5 different ways to potentially engage a conflict. There's escalated conflicts, polarized conflicts, grievances, performance issues, and then one-on-one conflicts. The course focuses mostly on the four that are organizational processes: escalated, polarized, grievance, and performance. Those are conflicts where organizational action is required. You can't just do this one-on-one. The organization has to take a formal stand. Maybe it's because it implicates a norm of how people need to show up at work or an organizational value. Maybe it's just gotten so disruptive that organizational resources are required, or maybe there's a debate that needs a firm answer from an organizational perspective. So the organization has to run a process in order to engage the conflict. We talk about those different forms of organizational engagement. And the course differentiates between these four different kinds of engaging, because the clearer we understand what the nature of a particular conflict is, the more we can design a process that actually meets the requirements of the moment. So a polarized substantive conflict, that's when people agree on the issue that needs to be resolved, but the ways of engaging it aren't working and are actually escalating it. For example, people might know they need to release a policy statement, but every time they go toward actually writing the policy statement, conversation devolves. All of a sudden, people have hurt feelings. They're calling each other names. We don't actually get to making the decision. That's an example of a polarized substantive conflict. Polarized because people often move into two or more different camps that feel like they're in opposition. And what we need to do is find a way for those camps to work together toward a solution. Then there's performance issues, and that's when the root cause of tension really comes down to a question of whether or not someone is meeting the expectations of their roles. We might have a situation, for example, where one person feels disrespected, the other feels unheard, but all the conversations where that plays out are really about whether one or both of them are doing their jobs well enough. So if we're going to intervene in something like this, we have to establish clear expectations of what the roles are and understand how people are fulfilling or not fulfilling those expectations. There's no sense in trying to get people to like each other if what's really happening is a question about, are people doing what they need to be doing? An escalated conflict is a co-created dynamic that's creating unworkable disruptions to individuals or groups. It's when two people just start rubbing each other the wrong way, and then at some point we can't be in a room together. And there's some kind of co-created element. It's not that one person did one specific thing that was wrong or harmful to someone else, and that was the genesis. It's kind of a big, mixed up, muddled up, co-created dynamic, which is what many conflicts really are. For example, two people might continuously get into arguments, both have legitimate hurt feelings, and both have legitimate requests of one another. Process for that, which is very different from a process for grievance, which is when one person's behavior is or may be harmful in a way that requires clear organizational response. For example, if someone engages in verbal abuse out of nowhere, or someone may be embezzling from the organization and someone else wants to flag that, right? That's not something where it's appropriate for two people to try to have a peer conversation that's supported by an organization. We need an organizational response that's more in the space of having an investigation and coming up with a clear sense of what happened, and then creating a clear request or boundary if necessary based on that. So the course outlines these four common types of conflict, and then discusses specific processes step by step for addressing each one of these different types of conflicts. And all of those specific ways of engagement, as well as our overall framework, are built off of this 5-step pattern that comes from the somatic work of Ray Castellino. Just to take action or potentially change anything, first we form an intention. What are we really truly trying to do? How do we prepare ourselves to be able to act in accordance with that intention? How do we then take action? Then how do we follow through, make sure we complete that? And then how do we integrate it? So all of these processes aren't just have a conversation. It's how do we form an intention, do the inner work necessary, then what is the quality of the conversation and the goals of the conversation in that action phase? Then what are the sets of things that one might do to make sure that you follow through on the agreements that were made in the action phase? And then after you follow through, how do we harvest those learnings for ourselves and for our organizations in order to really make the most of that transformation and meet the moment as a new person who's grown and learned through that process, through integration. And all of that arc is then included in the conflict preparedness policy. So a conflict preparedness policy is a document that articulates an organization's resilience practices and engagement processes that enable an organization to work together. In other words, it's a record of all the things that an organization is doing to intentionally build that sphere of resilience. In other words, it's a record of everything through the entire course that an organization chooses to actually implement inside of their context, so that that can be grounded and people can refer back to that as necessary. Now, of course, all of those written things, no matter how elegant or beautiful they might be, are really just tools. The way that people actually show up as human beings to the conversation, that's what influences how things truly go. So supports for ways to be skillful with conflict. These 4 supports in the course, in the context of our conflict resilience model and the course, are conflict mapping, self-awareness, teshuva, and signal and noise. So conflict mapping helps us understand what's happening in a conflict across those different 8 dimensions that I mentioned before: personal, interpersonal, organizational, systemic, ideological, world, all, and source, and helps us place ourselves and our assessment of what's going on in that really broad context. It's helpful because it starts to weave stories together to be able to create a shared story, so everyone in the conflict actually understands what has the same information and analysis of what is going on that's creating the situation that they're in. Self-awareness helps us understand what's going on inside of us as an individual. It helps us see our side of the street of the conflict, so to speak. And that supports growth-oriented accountability, helps us see where we might be contributing to the dynamic, see how that's connected to deeper things within us, and then helps us take accountability for those things. And simply being aware of what might be happening for us actually doesn't get us far enough in terms of motivating us to take accountability. And that's why we have teshuva. And teshuva comes from a Jewish concept that gets us ready to clean up our side of the street. It encourages us to meet a moment as an opportunity to deepen our sense and our alignment with who we truly want to be. So meeting a moment, not by pointing the finger at someone else and saying, what did you do? What did you do? Meeting a moment saying, there's got to be something here for me to learn. If somebody's telling me that they're having a challenging experience, there's got to be something for me that I can learn and grow, and use this as an opportunity to reveal my true heart to myself and to the other person. Of course, all of that is much easier if we're able to speak effectively to one another. So we offer the signal and noise framework that helps us communicate clearly about what occurred in the world. How did we experience that? How did we feel and interpret it? What is the story that we created from that? Based on that story, what are our goals that we want to achieve? And what's our strategy for trying to achieve those goals? So helping us practice that self-awareness in the context of our communication, and that allows us to collaborate about new choices that could be made. The course also includes all sorts of supplements. So these are just the supplements that are about the resilience practices. For the foundational practices, there's examples of value statements, of conflict belief statements. Personal practices, there's the nested conflict map, generative sentence starter guide. Interpersonal practices, there's a one-on-one engagement guide. Relationship building and connection prompts, conflict reflection guide, conflict style survey. Organizational practices, there's the vibes pulse survey template and practice, the hygiene meeting guide, and feedback session. And this is just some of the supplements that come along with the course that are accessible to anyone who takes that course. And if that's not enough, in addition to the course that we have just run and that finished up in May of 2024. We're rolling out starting in June of 2024 a series of hour-and-a-half long sessions that go deep into specific tools. Well, we'll talk about exactly what is the tool, how do you use it, what are some of the nuances of that. And that's a great opportunity for anyone who is interested in going into any of these tools, specifically for their own professional development as an individual, or for an organization that wants to learn how to use one of these tools inside the context of their own organization. The first course is going to be conflict mapping. That's a way to see many dynamics at play and determine how to intervene. There's the polarized issue map, which is going to be a way to work together to reach alignment about a substantive issue. Signal rich communication, a way to communicate effectively to work towards solutions together. Self reflection guide, a way to be more aware and prepared to engage conflict effectively. The one on one conversation guide, which is a way for people to work through tough conversations. Conflict styles guide, which is a way to be more self-aware and support overall resilience of an individual and an organization. The grievance template, which is a way to work together during a often fraught moment of escalation. And the feedback session guide, which is a way to work together to build resilience. So that is your quick summary of the Harmonized Building Conflict Resilient Organizations course and all of the different supplements within it and the upcoming offerings for how to use tools. We hope to see you soon. You can sign up for any of these courses and sessions at harmonize.work. And you can also follow us on LinkedIn or Instagram at Harmonize Consulting, or you could just follow us at Simon Mont and Tamala Gresham on LinkedIn. Hope to see you soon out there in the world.